Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our session on treatment in a manner similar to a state for water quality programs, process and perspectives. I know we're all just coming back from the last session and a break. So my name is Mari Lowinger, and I am a tribal coordinator for EPA Region 10. I'm from Anchorage, Alaska, and I've been with EPA's tribal program for about 17 years. And this has been some week that we've been having. Was really happy to hear the regional administrator at EPA call it treatment as a sovereign, and to know that that is going to be the language moving forward. So please pardon the slides where you see treatment as a state. It's a nice little institutional change that we have going on that hopefully will resonate out pretty soon. So TAS, or treatment as a sovereign, has always seemed to me and to many of us at EPA as a really empowering opportunity for tribes. But the process of getting that TAS approval has always been a bit unclear to me, really until the past year or so, when I had the opportunity to work with a team supporting a tribe and working with a tribe to review and approve their TAS application package for the Squaxin Island tribe. And in Region 10, we've recently had 3 tribes in the past couple years complete that application process and approval process. And so the timing seemed right to bring you guys a session where we dive into TAS a little bit more and have a panel of speakers share their firsthand experiences with you. So today we are joined in the virtual platform, and you can't see her on screen right now, but we're joined by Rachel Rankins, who is an EPA Region 10 Water Quality Standards Coordinator. And she's going to be providing a quick presentation on TAS background and the application and approval process. Also, I hope he's joining us online, as we'll have a representative from our Office of Regional Counsel, Ted Yakulik, with any legal questions that may come up. And we are joined by our panelists today here in the room, Todd Mitchell with the Swinomish tribes on the farther end of the table. He's their environmental director. And with the Shoshone-Bannock tribes, we're joined by water quality specialist Candon Tanaka. So we're going to begin with Rachel's presentation, and then from there, I'm going to be posing some questions for our panelists to respond to today. And I'm just going to ask that we hold questions until the end, because I want to save enough time to get through all of the great feedback and information from the panelists. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Rachel.
Thank you, Mari. Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Great. Next slide, please. Great. So Mari touched on this a little bit. Just wanted to start out with a general overview of what is TAS. Federally recognized tribes can apply to EPA for TAS for implementing and managing certain environmental programs under the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, and the Safe Drinking Water Act. And then upon approval, EPA treats those authorized tribes in a similar manner as a state, or treatment as a sovereign, for implementing and managing those programs. For today's presentation, we're focusing on the Clean Water Act. Next slide. Under Section 518 of the Clean Water Act, a tribe can be authorized to administer its own EPA-approved Clean Water Act programs. These include grant programs for monitoring and non-point source monitoring, and regulatory programs such as water quality standards, water quality certification, impaired waters and total maximum daily loads, the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System permits, and dredge and fill permits. A tribe needs to apply for TAS for each Clean Water Act program that it wishes to implement. However, applications for multiple programs can be combined. For example, often the Water Quality Standards and Water Quality Certification Program, TAS, is applied for together and approved at the same time. Next slide, please. So where may TAS authority be applied? Tribes can be granted TAS for waters within a tribe's formal reservation lands and any trust lands that are outside of the formal reservation. And we generally refer to those as informal reservation lands for the purposes of TAS. The areas that are eligible for TAS are indicated on the slide with solid borders, and those are the gray and green buckets. Next slide, please. There are 4 requirements that a tribe must demonstrate in their TAS application. And for the sake of time, I'm not going to go through each in great detail, but I wanted to draw your attention to factors 3 and 4. For factor 3, has the authority to regulate water quality. EPA interprets Clean Water Act Section 518 as providing an express delegation of authority over all lands. This includes land owned in fee by a non-member that's located within the boundaries of a tribe's reservation. The second part of this requirement includes identifying the waters for which a tribe is seeking TAS. And this is often demonstrated through mapping of the TAS parcels and by and through legal descriptions that can be obtained by through BIA that describe the area for which the land is asserting authority. The fourth factor is has the technical capability to administer an effective program. And this factor is often demonstrated by outlining existing environmental and health programs and describing the technical and administrative capabilities of the staff that will be administering those programs. Often past reports such as assessment reports or QAPs are provided for this factor. Next slide. These are the main milestones in the TAS process. I really wanted to stress the importance of step 0 for pre-coordination with EPA regional offices. We are here to help, and we find that if we have the opportunity to have a few discussions before an application is submitted and review the application prior to official submittal, it can really streamline the process up front. Once a tribe submits a final application, EPA confirms that the 4 requirements for TAS were addressed, and then EPA goes out to public comment. Specifically, EPA is seeking comment on a tribe's assertion of jurisdictional authority to administer the Clean Water Act programs over surface waters within the reservation and trust lands described in the application. EPA's regulations also require that the agency provide notice for opportunity to comment to all appropriate governmental entities. And we consider those to be any adjacent jurisdictions that have that can implement the Clean Water Act, such as neighboring federally recognized tribes or adjacent states. After the public comment period closes, EPA reviews the comments and responds to those comments, and the tribe has the opportunity to respond as well. However, that is not required. And then EPA moves towards a final decision. Once approved by EPA, a tribe generally has the same program authorities and responsibility as a state does. Next slide. So I wanted to walk through a couple of these Clean Water Act programs and what TAS approval actually means and what it actually allows. So taking a step back, let's just talk about the water quality standards and water quality certification programs. Under Clean Water Act 303C, states and authorized tribes have the primary responsibility for developing water quality standards within their jurisdiction. And put very simply, water quality standards describe the desired condition of a water body and the means or criteria that are necessary to protect that condition. And then under the 401 program, states and authorized tribes have the authority to grant, deny, or waive certification of proposed federal licenses or permits that may discharge into waters of the United States. So keeping those program overviews in mind, approval of a TAS application would allow a tribe to adopt, review, and revise water quality standards to be submitted to EPA for action. And then once EPA approves those standards, they can be implemented into all Clean Water Act programs. The TAS also allows a tribe to certify federal licenses and permits that discharge into reservation or trust waters. Reservation land or trust land waters, and be treated as an affected state or neighboring jurisdiction for all federal licenses and permits that are discharged upstream of a tribe's waters. And then also be treated as an affected state for national pollutant discharge elimination systems permits that are discharging upstream of the reservation or trust lands. Just as a note, the adoption of water quality standards is a separate process. Tribes may submit draft standards at the same time as they're working on a TAS application, but that is not required. So you do not have to have water quality standards in hand to apply for TAS. Next slide. And I wanted to touch on the 303D program as well. Under Section 303D of the Clean Water Act, states are required to evaluate all available water quality related data and information to identify a list of impaired water bodies which are not meeting water quality standards, and then developing total maximum daily loads for each pollutant or water body combination. A total maximum daily load establishes the maximum amount of a pollutant that's allowed in a water body to still meet water quality standards. And this serves as a starting point or a tool for restoring water quality. So then approval of a TAS for the 303D program application allows a tribe to assume the primary role in deciding which waters on their reservations are impaired and in need of total maximum daily loads. They're responsible for the priority ranking for TMDL development, and they're responsible for setting pollutant source allocations for those waters. In Region 10, our assessment program coordinator is Jill Fulliger. I've included her contact information on the slide in case you're interested to learn more about that program or TAS for the 303D program. Next slide. I also wanted to highlight some TAS resources that are available to you. EPA has a strategy for reviewing TAS applications. This is a memorandum that outlines how each of the eligibility factors can be demonstrated in TAS applications, and it does cover TAS for the Clean Water Act, the Safe Drinking Water Act, and the Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, and Safe Drinking Water Act. For TAS for water quality standards and water quality certification programs, EPA's Tools for Tribes webpage has a streamlined TAS application that can be downloaded. There's also a template for TAS for the impaired waters and total maximum daily loads program. Also, as a TAS resource, I have listed some points of contact. We are available to you, and happy to answer questions if you have them, or just interested to learning more about TAS or interested to start the process. Next slide. All right, and then in closing, here's a screenshot of Region 10. So far, none of the tribes in Region 10 have applied for TAS for the 303D program, or the impaired waters and listings and total maximum daily loads. But there are 18 tribes with TAS for the water quality standards and water quality certification programs. And these are all listed on the slide in the order of when TAS was granted. The names of the tribes that are in bold are ones that have currently effective under the Clean Water Act water quality standards. So they have either adopted standards and submitted them to be approved by EPA and received that approval, or they are federally recognized or federally promulgated water quality standards. In the spirit of making connections, if you are interested in TAS, I do encourage you to do some networking with representatives from these tribes. And we also have two wonderful representatives on this panel that are here to share their experiences with TAS. I want to hand over the floor to Mari to facilitate that discussion so you can hear directly from Todd and Camden about their process and their experience. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. And can you advance the slide? Thank you. So we're going to make a transition here to a discussion with our panelists. Up on the slide here, we have a few questions that we're going to ask them to respond to. And we're going to start with the first couple questions for both of them. So the first question is, if you can recall or were around when your tribe was going through the process of originally pursuing TAS, what were some of the motivating factors or interests in developing TAS for water quality standards or 401? Whichever one of you would like to jump in with that first. Thanks, Camden.
Hello. So I think the driving factor is simply self-determination and self-regulation was the primary driving factor for applying for the TAS program. And along those lines, you know, if tribes do not have that TAS authority, by de facto, the state's standards come into play and are what are used as the bar for writing permits and licenses. And the tribe was never comfortable with that and want to develop water quality standards that were reflective of the tribe's values, beliefs, and culture.
Okay, I think, yeah, this RTAS, at least for 106 predated me. But our tribe, I think, wanted to, you know, when there's ability to and assume that program to, you know, administer water quality standards on our own reservation. So, but it's definitely a long process. So, so keeping it going definitely takes some work. But I think, and we still want to pursue that. So, you know, getting there to, you know, keep monitoring our own waters, making sure they're clean. But also, you know, as part of it is the 401 certification process. So to be able to review those kind of projects to make sure that they, you know, continue to meet, you know, our water quality standards.
Thank you. So along those lines, pardon the feedback here. I'll turn this mic off in just a second after I pose this next question. So with that in mind, how did your tribe get started, or what do you recommend for others that are thinking about pursuing this path? If you want to jump in.
Okay. I would say that think of it as a relay marathon. You sometimes forget you're actually running. All my notes are in a PowerPoint I usually give about this because it's I forget sometimes what our process has been since we've been, like I said, we've been working on we got our TAS in 2008 for the water quality standards portion of things. But that was, you know, a run up of about 2 years, you know, of more attorney time really to build the application. So I remember, I think I still have it in one of my files, you know, they built a, you know, binder, a 2-inch thick binder of hard copy things for our original application. And then we also had to respond to comments from the state. So our neighbor was the state, and so he submitted another 2-inch binder of materials. So it's really a thing of both needing to learn water quality standards yourself to be able to develop them and write them. Takes a lot of attorney time for legal staff to review those things. And then, once you apply or hand something off to EPA, there's, time on EPA side to review and respond to things. So you'll forget what you did. Your attorneys will forget what you did. And EPA will maybe forget what they did, because they got a big lag time between all of these, submittals and, response to comments and, updating things. So I think one piece of advice is, be cognizant of the process being long, but also, use other tribes as resources. All of the list of standards that are approved, you can use. They're already approved by EPA. So if they're applicable to your area, then you can actually use that language in your own standards. So in some cases, you don't have to reinvent the wheel every time, but that, using already approved things from other standards will at least help with that specific either narrative or criteria.
There we are. Thank you, Todd. You kind of answered the next question. So I'm just going to reiterate the first question for Camden. How did your tribe get started, or what do you recommend for others getting started?
Okay. There was talks and rumblings and half-hearted, and not to be disrespectful by saying that, but half-hearted attempts at starting the TAS process before I started working here. I think it was just a matter of making it a priority to start that process. What was it? Oh, so really what we did was, really leaned on the tribal water quality standards personnel at the time to help us get that rolling in 2002 is when we made it a priority. And for those that are going to, potentially move in the direction of receiving that authority, that's the biggest thing that will help you start it and will help you get through the process. Like Todd was saying, it's a marathon. So the biggest thing is to make it a priority, because you can't just have, it's not going to happen in a year. It's not going to happen in 2 years. And as long as you hold that as a priority, the momentum stays with it.
That's great. Thanks. So I know you guys kind of touched on answering our next question, which was, do you have any lessons learned or advice for others? And we have several other questions on the next slide. But before we go there, are there any other lessons learned or advice that you would have for others as they're getting started, or in general about the process?
I would just say, obviously, like I said, make it a priority within your tribal organization to get it done. And don't be afraid to ask and lean on EPA for resources, because they have resources that the tribes you do not have, and they can bring it to bear, and it will definitely help the process.
Yeah, I'd agree with that for sure. And yeah, think of it as kind of two concurrent processes that, there's the TAS process to get the authority to have water quality standards, and the actual process for providing water quality standards for review to EPA. So, and they both take that attorney time and staff time to work those things up. So yeah, I think, lean on other tribes, lean on other tribal standards, but, know your own values, stick to your own values that, our water should be, either narratively or numerically this kind of standard. Because we've done that with our standards to, and in some places to say, you know, we need to have this kind of standard in there to protect, you know, some aspect of our waters. Yeah, it's kind of like, yeah, remember what your values are. So when you get stuck in all these processes and all these, you know, back and forth on, you know, little bits of the criteria or a little bit of words here and there that, you know, you remember, you know, in the long run, you know, it protects your waters.
Thank you, Todd. Can you go to the next slide, please? Oh, boy. And so this one is back to Todd. Were there any significant obstacles or what was the biggest challenge getting through the application process? And how did your tribe manage it?
Okay, just on the application process, I think, yeah, we're blessed to have a great legal department at Swinomish. Yeah, even though our you know, submittals took a lot of attorney time to build, I think, you know, we have, you know, a great history and a great archive, you know, in our tribe to be able to pull those kind of you know, legal documents together, whether that relates to, you know, our jurisdiction or relates to our tribal boundaries, and you know, other cases relating to, you know, our you know, authority as a tribe. You know, was a great help in, you know, getting that big application together. You know, I remember flipping through it and I'm like, oh my gosh, there's so many things in here that they've been able to pull together so they could submit to EPA. Well, not just once, but twice, you know, pulling all these things together. So yeah, it's really, you know, hopefully, yeah, you can, if you're thinking about that, you know, make it a priority for, you know, both your environmental staff and legal staff.
Thank you, Todd. So my next question is for Candon. What was the experience like engaging with stakeholders, tribal stakeholders in particular, or other stakeholders in getting through that public comment period?
So I guess the first part of that is the tribal stakeholders. That process was not hard. We have 5 districts within the tribe, and we went out and presented the application and got comments from them. And I don't think we had anybody that was against the TAS application, and they were all supportive of it. Now, outside of the tribe is a whole different story. The state of Idaho, FMC Corporation and the JR Simplot Corporation really fought hard against us. And particularly the state, because at that time, there were no tribes within the state of Idaho that had TAS authority. So it was a new process. And that was, you know, fortunately, we had a lot of help from our tribal legal counsel and the EPA legal counsel in addressing those response comments.
I hadn't planned to ask Todd this too, but I can see some body language there. Was there anything else you wanted to add along those lines? No. Okay. All right. We'll move along then. So for Todd, during the TAS application process, what resources or what was the most helpful for your tribe?
Like I said before, our legal staff really took care of the application. I know we met with the legal counsel at that time with EPA several times, you know, to ask questions to say, you know, what, you know, of the things that, you know, are showing up here. And I think it was similar back in the day when we started the application process to, you know, make sure that they were able to, you know, hone in on the exact kind of materials they needed to submit to, like I said before, state where our jurisdiction is and so forth.
Thank you. Okay, so last question for both of you. So, after getting EPA approval for TAS, did that fulfill the original goals for your tribe, and how's your program going now? You want to take first?
So we still don't have our water quality standards approved by EPA yet. So that goal has not been fulfilled yet. But I think it's we received the TAS, once we received that TAS approval, it really put us in the driver's seat because bam, we were interpreting our standards, although they're not approved by EPA, we're applying and implementing and interpreting those.
Yes, we're still on the process also. So much is listed on there is, bold as having water quality standards, and we're only partially approved. Just our recreational bacteria criteria are approved, and everything else is still under review. But yeah, I mean, we said we worked this as a concurrent process. So we actually started with drafts of our standards based off of our Northwest Indian Fish Commission consortium drafts back in the mid-90s. But I think, getting TAS, we had submitted an actual draft before or during when we started building our TAS application. But I think afterwards that helped us, really get EPA's ear to say, we have TAS, here's the standards we're submitting to you for review. So that in some cases, we could get, a little bit better turnaround from EPA on reviews of those drafts. But it's still a marathon. So we submitted our first formal draft in 2017 after we went through our own public comment period. And that was over the years, that was the 21st significant draft and revision that we submitted to EPA. And then we had to, respond to comments again. So we submitted draft 23 to EPA in 2019 after our own public comment period and our own tribal ordinance approval. And we're still working on a few things to, get the full approval. So I think we've had, like I said, we've had slowdowns on our own side when we, get a draft or comments back from EPA or whatnot, then it goes to the bottom of our attorney's pile. So they got to work down to it again so they can get to it. So it's definitely that thing of like, how much do you want to prioritize it in your tribe for any of these processes when you get these things back? For us, it's like, well, yes, it's a priority, but we have these other significant things to get to also. So yeah, we're still under process for a good portion of it. But I think, one of the big things we were waiting for was the EPA's biological evaluation sent to the fisheries services. So hopefully, they'll be able to work that process in the next year or so and actually have the full suite of our standards approved. The one thing we did to stopgap things, once we got our TAS in 2008, we needed, we got the authority for our 401 certification process. So we had to, they started coming in, they're like, okay, you're the authority for 401 certifications. What do you do when you don't have standards? Well, we did a stopgap by adopting, or not really adopting, but just saying we're going to use the adjacent state standards until we have our own standards approved. Just so that we could see what was in these 401 certifications applications as they went through. So we've been doing that for since 2008. How many years is that? 14, 13. So yeah, so those kind of the things you got to think of along the way of like, okay, well, these concurrent processes, they're maybe not going to line up, or they're definitely not going to line up. So what can you do to, make sure your waters are still protected?
Thank you so much, Todd. So one of my takeaways from hearing this is that it can be a long, slow process. So being patient with it, being really organized, being strategic, and then adapting your strategy, right? And leaning on others for support as a team. And I'll just offer from my experience, my short bit of experience working with a team on reviewing a TAS application and getting through to the approval process, the staff that I worked with in the water division, Rachel and Ted in our Office of Legal Counsel, were just spectacular at providing resources. So if any of you work for tribes that are thinking about that, even very early on in the process, I'd encourage you to lean on your EPA tribal coordinator as a starting point, and they'll probably refer you on to staff in our water division. And there's a lot of resources there. And speaking of resources, I believe that in the WOVA app, this presentation should be in there so that if you want to look at it later and look at the list of points of contact, or even look at the list of tribes that have received TAS approval, that's in there. Because I really personally believe in using each other for support and as mentors. So use that network that we have. And with that, we have 1 minute left. I see that there is a couple comments in the chat, and I'm seeing Adam wave his hand, so I'm going to hand the mic and see what's going on there.
So I had one follow-up question for you both that I thought might be helpful for others. And I also want to just kind of and then I'll bring it over. Region 10 sworn is like, even though this is a long, cumbersome process, Region 10 is actually the fastest region of the regions in getting tribes through TAS. So it might be hard to imagine, but we are pretty proud of that, and we're continuing to look for ways to do it faster and faster. So thinking back to, I guess, Todd, it was 2008 when you're first going through this. I know one of the struggles that tribes have when they're first contemplating going through the TAS process is, hey, I've got a natural resources division over here, and then maybe I've got environmental over here, or some other program where the GAP staff lives, and like, whose job is it to pull? Where are we going to find funding to pull the initial application together? Because the GAP person has a full menu of responsibilities already. So where does it come from? So I thought that might be just helpful to hear both from Swinomish and Shombanik's experience, how you've either married those departments or used the GAP funding or some other funding just to start the process. And then I'll run it back there.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of all that to say, if it becomes a priority for your tribe, to write it into your next IGAP, write it into your next 106, so that you can pull some of that time and pull some of those resources. I think we need to do that mostly on our own environmental and water quality technical side. And a lot of our attorney time is absorbed by the tribe.
Yeah, I would mirror that same response. Essentially, we had it written to our GAP and 106 programs, but the legal aspect is held by the tribal government and the leadership about essentially where they're going to allow the legal counsel time to be used. So definitely get your depending on how your tribe is organized, make sure that you get that legal counsel approval to commit time to this project.
What role does the respective state play in this process? Secondly, the jurisdictional issues. Is it best to have your water settlement agreement in place, or how do you determine the jurisdiction as rivers flow through the reservations? Likewise, how do you differentiate between groundwater, surface water? You're mainly talking about surface water, aren't you now? Whereas you connect with the safe drinking water, because you talked about irrigable lands. So it seems to me there's got to be a connection.
So do you guys want to take that, or I'm wondering if we want to redirect to Rachel? Do you guys want to answer that?
This is Ted. I can weigh in a little there. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
The state has when we receive we work with a tribe in advance of making a determination that the application is complete. So we will review drafts and, kind of talk, identify potential issues during that part of the process. But when we determine the application is complete, we provide, we send a copy of the application to what are called under the statute and regulation appropriate governmental entities. And those are governmental entities that may share the same sort of regulatory authority. So the potential to regulate waters of the United States. So we send an application to the state where the tribe's reservation and trust lands are located, and they can review it and comment on it. And we also have a public comment period that's supposed to be limited to the issue of jurisdiction only. And that lasts typically for 30 days, but can be extended. So the state has an opportunity to provide comments in or, opposing the application.
Okay, I'll just make some quick closing comments of just reiterate some things to, if it becomes a priority for your tribe, set aside your time. I think one of our priorities, was to, protect our waters, but also we developed our own fish consumption rate. So that directly plugs into all of the toxic criteria numbers and renumbers them, recalculates them, because I think that was a big issue for our tribe to make sure that our fish eaters, fish consumers were protected based on our standards.
Hey, Todd, this is Ted. In your experience, I mean, the application process is two-part. One is to just obtain the authority to develop water quality standards, and then the actual development and approval of water quality standards. And those are distinct phases, correct? And I think the first one is more streamlined than the second. Is that your experience?
Yes, I would say so, yes.
All right, well, in the nature of time and the elder panel that's about to come into this room, I want to give them enough time to get everybody settled. But thank you all very much. I haven't been able to monitor the chat, so hopefully there's nothing burning in there. Sounds like there isn't. So I just wanted to have us all give a warm round of applause to our panelists for sharing their wisdom. Thank you so much.